Office and UNHCR Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific joint webinar on implementing the recommendations of the Bali Process projects on civil registration. And thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Peggy and I'm the Senior Protection Associate at the UNHCR Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific, and I will be your facilitator for this webinar. And just a little housekeeping before we get started. In this webinar, it is important to always mute your microphone when not speaking so that the speaker can clearly be heard. And in this webinar, we have interpreters available in English, Thai, Urdu, Bengali, and Vietnamese. And you can choose your preferred language on the Zoom control panel. And please be informed that this webinar is recorded. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box as we have a person monitoring the chat. And if we have time at the end of the webinar, we will get back to your questions. And just to give you a bit of a background of this webinar, the Bali Process and UNHCR, we have jointly engaged in the development of the Bali Process Civil Registration Assessment Toolkit. And currently, the 3 pilot projects in Thailand, Pakistan, and Vietnam have already been concluded, and a comparative report on the pilot projects has already been produced. And on our agenda today, following the introductory remarks by Mr. Sukmo Yuwono and Dr. Matthias Rus, Dr. Sipapa will present the conclusions and recommendations from the pilot projects. Later, we will hear the responses from the representatives from the technical advisory group and the representatives from Thailand, Vietnam, and Pakistan. Afterwards, there will be a discussion on the next steps moderated by Dr. Matthias and concluding the webinar by Mr. David Scott. And now, without further ado, we return the time over to Mr. Sukmo Yuwono, the co-manager of the Regional Support Office of the Bali Process on People Smuggling, Trafficking in Person, and related transnational crime to open the webinar. And you may find more details of Mr. Sukmo in the chat box. And Mr. Sukmo, you may take the floor. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Ms. Nira. Ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished speaker from Thailand, Pakistan, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and UNHCR Bureau for Asia and the Pacific. Thank you for joining us in today's webinar. I look forward to attending your discussion on implementing the recommendation of the 3 pilot projects that have faced by the Bali Process Civil Registration Assessment Toolkits. Today's webinar will focus on the way forward of the outcomes of these projects. The most important question is this context and this stage are, how are we going to translate recommendation into targets and actionable plans following the framework of the Bali Process Civil Registration Assessment Toolkits, and how the Bali Process Member State could use the toolkits to implement the self-assessment. Having studied the synthesis of the pilot reports, I am personally convinced that the approach or framework of the Bali Process Civil Registration Toolkits is useful for states in conducting self-assessment of civil registration system and addressing civil registration issues among hard-to-reach population groups. It is widely accepted that a comprehensive approach to prevent irregular immigration, trafficking in person, and people smuggling must also address the root causes of mainstreaming issues, such as civil registration, a basis for legal identity, documentation, and prevention of statelessness. In the 2016 Bali Declaration on People Smuggling, Trafficking in Person and Related Transnational Crime, the importance of civil registration and vital statistic was acknowledged. This is also reflected and reconfirmed in the works of the Bali Process Civil Registration Assessment Toolkit and pilot project supported by the Regional Support Office of the Bali Process and implemented with the technical support of UNHCR Bureau for the Asia and the Pacific. Notably, the toolkit was developed by consulting with the Bali Process Member States through the technical advisory group of the national expert from Bangladesh, Malaysia, Pakistan, the Philippines, and Thailand. The group was supported by senior research advisor and technical expert from the UNHCR Bureau for the Asia and the Pacific. Bali Process Member States, Thailand, Pakistan, and Vietnam have piloted the toolkits, and the pilot project have now been concluded. It is therefore the time for us to offer a peer learning platform of sharing experiences in using the Bali Process Toolkit to implement self-assessment of civil regularization system and to agree on the way forwards. The pilot project were a standalone Bali Process activity. At the same time, the way assist Bali Process Member States to meet the goals of the Asia and Pacific decades on civil legislation. National government with the Asia Pacific region commit themselves to get everyone to the picture by 2024 at the first ESCAP Minister Conference on Civil Registration and Vital Statistics in 2014. At this occasion, they created the vision that all people in the Asia Pacific will benefit from universal and responsive CRVS system, facilitating the realization of their right and supporting a good government, health, and development. As such, the Bali Process Civil Regularization Assessment Pilot Project will feature as the best practice examples in the region, and hopefully increase the momentum toward comprehensive registration in the institutional framework as well. Ladies and gentlemen, please let me conclude with some word of personal assessment. Since the inception in 2002, the Bali process has committed to addressing root causes of trafficking in person, including the lack of civil registration and legal identity documentation. The toolkits and pilot project are important milestones in this context. The use of the toolkits may lead toward addressing registration and documentation gaps among hard-to-reach population group. It might also reduce the risk of becoming a victim of human trafficking and prevent irregular migration. I am very much looking forward to our fruitful discussion today, and I would be pleased if the discussion lead to the way forward to formulate action plan based on the outcome of the pilot project and inclusive civil registration among all the group population. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sukmo, for an introductory speech. And up next, I would like to introduce Dr. Matthias Roos, a senior regional stateless officer at the UNHCR Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific, to say a few words to opening the webinar.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, Chair. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of UNHCR, I would like to welcome you all to this webinar. A big thank you today goes to all the honorable participants and in particular to the representatives of the technical advisory group and the highly esteemed governments of the pilot countries, Thailand, Vietnam, and Pakistan. Let me just add a few words of apology to our esteemed speakers from Thailand. We scheduled this event on a national holiday for Thailand. We are very sorry for that. Unfortunately, it was not differently possible, but thank you very much. Special thanks for honoring us with your presence and your inputs on this holy day. Talking about thanks, I would also like to thank all of the national stakeholders for the great trust that you have shown over the last couple of years for working with us, with the Regional Support Office of the Bali Process and UNHCR Regional Bureau for Asia and Pacific. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today is a day of celebration, and I think we can all agree that the Bali Process Toolkit pilot projects have advanced well, and they have produced desired results. In some respects, they have even exceeded expectations. The final reports of these projects have now been submitted, analyzed, consolidated, and I give my congratulations to all the participants in this process, in particular, of course, the teams of experts who have drafted all these reports. Apart from celebrating the success, today we want to look forward. Where do we stand on national action plans? How about civil registration targets in the countries for the next years? And lastly, are there any other countries who might get engaged in inequality assessments in the area of civil registration? While we look thus forward today, I would also like to recall the legal and policy framework for civil registration in which we are all acting. First, there is the the Sustainable Development Goal Target 16.9, which requests legal identity, including birth registration, for all by 2030. Then again, there is the leading development principle of leaving no one behind, which confirms civil registration as a precondition for inclusion. Recently, all UN member states have adopted our common agenda, which renews the commitments of the United Nations member states to civil registration and legal identity for all as a key issue and driver for development. In the Asia-Pacific region, we are also guided by the ESCAP CIBS decade 2015 to 2024 to get everyone in the picture, to which my honorable predecessor as a speaker has already referred to. The vision of this decade has recently been confirmed by the ESCAP Ministerial Declaration and in November 2021. And this declaration now calls for inequality assessment and the removal of all barriers to civil registration for marginalized persons. In the light of this legal and policy framework, in the light of all these commitments that the states have undertaken, I now look very much forward to hear from our first speaker, Dr. Sipapa Pecharamensee, about the contribution that the Bali Process Civil Registration Assessment Toolkit has made to achieve these goals, and that the toolkit will hopefully continue to make so that we can all achieve the goals of the international community. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your kind attention and now give the floor back to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matthias, for a welcoming speech. And right before we move on to the next agenda, I would like to request all speakers to turn on the camera for pictures, just for 5 to 10 seconds, please. Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Nam Nyok Hien, can you please turn on your camera? And also Mr. Palach Kantibala, and check Mujibu. Okay. Yes, thank you very much. All right. And okay, so let's move on to the next agenda. So now I return the time over to Dr. Sipapa Pecharamensee to share the conclusions or the lesson learned from the pilot projects and any recommendations. Dr. Sipapa is a former senior research advisor to UNHCR, and please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Very good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank RSO Bali Process and UNHCR for entrusting me to actually work on this particular project. And I really hope that you have already read the synthesis which I think was already circulated to our participants beforehand. What I'm going to focus here today, within the 20 minutes, I'll be reiterating a bit the objectives of the Bali Process CRBS Toolkit, and then the expected outputs of the pilot projects in the 3 countries before moving into the challenges and gaps to accessing the serious registration of the hard to reach populations in the 3 countries. And then I will end with some recommendations, of course, based on the pilot projects, and then ways forward that we think that we should move together. Next slide, please. The objectives of, next slide, please. Yes, the objectives, I just want to reiterate what Mr. Sukmo has mentioned in his opening, that the Bali Process Toolkit is there to assist member states of Bali Process in assessing and improving the national civil registration system. You might see the term CRBS, which refers to civil registration and vital statistics. Unfortunately, the 3 pilot projects just focus on civil registration, as vital statistic is actually another important issue that we have to address together. But the toolkit is there to promote universal access to civil registration, as I said, particularly among hard-to-reach populations in the region. As for the pilot projects were implemented in order to evaluate, not only to evaluate the Bali Process CRBS Toolkit for further improvement and adjustment if needed, but also it meant to provide a platform for discussions among relevant stakeholders and draw the lessons for its implementation. Of course, today's session is a platform that provides the 3 pilot countries sharing their experiences in piloting the Bali Process Toolkit. Next slide, please. There are some outputs expected from the pilot projects, and of course from the use of Bali Process Toolkit. The first one is really, we are expecting that the countries using the Bali Process Toolkit will come up with assessment report with a comprehensive description of the findings and recommendations. The second one is the action plan, a document that explains how the assessment recommendations will be implemented, including what needs to be done, when, how, and by whom, usually within the time frame of 1 to 10 years. So that's the action plan that we are looking for. And then the targets, which actually provide milestones or objectives towards which effort can be directed for measuring the progress quantitatively and qualitatively. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, learning from the 3 pilot projects, we actually identify some challenges and gaps to access civil registration of hard-to-reach population. And the challenges and gaps were identified from 2 groups. One is for officials, the service providers, and another is recipients of the services, service beneficiaries. For officials who are providing services, we actually found out that there is a perception of linking birth registration with acquisition of nationality, which becomes a kind of a stumbling block for accessing or allowing access to civil registration. The second gap or challenge that we find is illegality of the stay of the persons that prevent them from registering birth of their children. The third one is legal barriers. For example, lack of specific law that we found, like in the case of Vietnam, which was reflected in the report, policies to facilitate civil registration. Another one, which is also quite serious, is the long procedures and requirements of documentations that actually we found in some countries of the pilot projects. Lack of resources and local capacity, especially at the local level. This is the issues found in the 3 countries of the pilot projects. We also found heavy burdens that local officials will have to carry because not only they are taking care of civil registration, but they are also responsible for many other duties assigned to them by the relevant agencies. Another gaps that we found is that many local officials are unable to communicate with ethnic minorities or migrants due to language barrier, incompleteness and unavailability of data and vital statistics among hard to reach populations, especially vulnerable and marginalized groups, is actually another barrier that we learn from the pilots. Incorrect registration, which often becomes the initial barriers because correcting data in the system doesn't seem to be that easy. And then in a country, we also found the issue of corruption related to registering birth and issuing of ID card. Next slide, please. For the populations, the service beneficiaries, it seems that they do not have clear understanding of registration. Not only they do not have clear understanding, but in some cases they do not see actually the benefit of accessing to civil registration, or they just realize when they need to use the document. Geographical and practical barriers seem to be there as well, especially those living in the remote areas with difficult public transportation. We found this, for example, in Thailand and Vietnam. Having many low-income groups, especially homeless people, make access to birth registration impossible because they tend to actually, if they used to have documents, they tend to lose that document in one way or another. As I mentioned, language barriers for hard to reach groups is also a problem. And then in some countries, conflicts and cultural religious practices present obstacles to register the birth. I put this here because although it was not reflected clearly in the 3 pilot projects, but we know that in some countries in the region, well, South Asia and the Asia Pacific, conflicts are there, and it prevents accessing to registration. Based on the 3 pilot projects, we came up with some recommendations to improve civil registration system. Next slide, please. The first recommendation, could you go to next slide, please? Yeah. The first recommendation is actually improvement, making improvements to law and policy to be responsive to the changing context, because the context of migration is changing over time, and we deem that it is important for laws and policy to keep pace with the changing situation of migration and demography. The second one is having a specific legal framework and plan for action for the registration of hard-to-reach population. This is actually recommended by Vietnam report. Another recommendation came from Pakistan, is expanding the coverage of the national registration and vital statistics system to cover hard-to-reach population. You might notice that there are some specific recommendations came from each country. This is the process recommendation for the process of using the CRVS, Bali Process CRVS Toolkit is the participatory process with all stakeholders. And then we see as well that registration has not been prioritized in many countries, so priority of registration services must be, should be there. Updating knowledge and understanding for local authorities and officials, because we found out that they tend not to have clear understanding or updated knowledge of the registration in their own country. Increasing online provision of registration services. This is, it actually already exists in some countries in the region, but maybe still quite limited. And then last but not least is, at least for this particular slide, improving intersectoral cooperation, because exchanging or sharing information is very important for the completeness of the registration system. Next slide, please. I came up with some reflections and recommendations for the Bali Process Toolkit, CRVS Toolkit. Some reflections came from different countries of the pilot, that the toolkit is useful as it contributes to assessing the situation of the CRVS for hard-to-reach populations with clear method and tools provided to guide the government and stakeholders. I quote this from one report. It was found out as well, and it was reflected that the toolkit provides extensive details that each country can pick and choose. It was also reflected that the hard-to-reach population was narrowly defined, which actually limit the definition. So a recommendation that will come later. English barrier, which actually leads to heavy burden on translation and editing. Of course, this is the experience found and reflections. So recommendations for the Bali Process Toolkit. Adjustment of language use, including adding introductory paragraph about the use of the toolkit, expanding the definition of the hard-to-reach population to cover wider groups who face difficulties in accessing civil registration. Any translation, if needed, should be based on the needs of each member state of the Bali process and should be done on request only to ensure that translation will be meaningfully used. And emphasis on the process and ownership in the CRVS toolkit. Two other recommendations include contextualizing the use of the toolkit, and that was actually happening in the 3 pilot projects. Because it takes into account cultural, legal, regulatory, and institutional framework for CRVS, and then developing a training package based on the current toolkit. I have a few more slides. I'm not quite sure if my time is running out, but there are some recommendations for way forward, including awareness raising among the government officials and the public in general, capacity building, which is badly needed in all countries, learning exchange around legal and regular, learning exchange and around legal and regulatory challenges. So this would be enabling experience countries to share knowledge with others. Partnership among, working with partners across developing spectrum, including social protection, security sector, in order to enhance equity and ensure that hard-to-reach population, marginalized population, benefit from recognition and registration. Intersectoral action, intersectoral cooperation, ownership, I have already mentioned and emphasized, of the country in question, and then initiating thematic sandbox that can have mutual technical learning and co-design plan of action. I have 3 questions in mind when we propose the way forward. The first question, how can the success of the pilot project be built on? The second question, what regional initiatives could support country efforts to assessing the CRVS of the hard-to-reach population? And then what role could the private sectors and non-state actors play in building and operating the CRVS? Next slide, and this is my last slide. That way forwards are recommended here. That the 3 countries, because none of them has developed the action plan yet, as far as I know. So it was recommended the 3 countries which have already piloted the Bali Process Toolkit to develop an action plan for improving the civil registration system. Organize 1 or 2 peer learning process to share experience in using Bali Process Toolkit to implement self-assessment. Actually, today, webinar is one of the peer learning process. For technical advisory group of national experts and UNHCR Regional Bureau of Asia Pacific to reassemble to confirm the way forward. And I hope that today we may be able to reconfirm the ways forward. Continue to provide technical support to Bali Process members, either through RSO or through UNHCR to exercise the self-assessment on request. And then, of course, we want to see that the Bali Process Toolkit is promoted in other forums, for example, ASEAN, Bali Process Forum, and others. And then the last recommendation is really to rebranding the Bali Process Toolkit as Bali Process Toolkit for inclusive registration. I guess this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. And thank Lindsay for helping me with screen sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sipapa, for sharing the conclusions and recommendations from the pilot projects. So based on the outcomes of the pilot projects itself, the toolkit appears to be helpful in identifying the challenges in accessing to civil registration for hard-to-reach population, and helpful to guide the government or stakeholders in developing policies or the way forward. So up next, we will be hearing the responses from the representative from the technical advisory group and the representatives from Thailand, Vietnam, and Pakistan. So first, I would like to invite Mr. Palash Kantibala, Registrar General, Birth and Death Registration, Local Government Division of the Ministry of Local Government, Rural Development and Cooperatives of Bangladesh, and Mr. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the former Secretary to the Government, member of the Technical Advisory Group, and the current National Consultant to UNICEF, to take the floor to provide us with the responses following the implementation of the Bali Process Toolkit.
Thank you very much. Oh, please carry on.
Please, sir.
No, plus I did not see you. I think you was speaking that. Please carry on.
And thank you, Meera and SRO delegates for inviting me in this webinar. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Shiprafa, who presented in details about Bali process toolkit project, taking the 3 countries, challenges and gaps to access civil stations, and some recommendations and reflections. I think we should concentrate ourselves in 4 things sincerely. One of the things is the elemental cause of this Bali process civil registrations, and the next is the efficient cause. Third is the formal cause, and finally is the final cause. If we can accommodate these 4 things jointly and smoothly within the countries we have taken our projects, then we can forward ourselves in good places for the good achievement of this civil registrations processes. In this context, I would like to switch over myself to my senior colleague, Mr. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who was a former Registrar General. He started in detail about this thoroughly. So I would like Mr. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, our senior colleague, to take over this session next for me, in favor of me.
Okay, thank you very much to my colleagues, Mr. Polash Kantibala, the present Registrar General. I think you can minimize your screen. Do you hear me, please?
Yes,
everyone?
yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. At the very outset of my quick response, I'd like to express my sincere thanks and gratitude to the authority of Bali Process RSO, and as well as the UNHCR official for inviting me to join this webinar, considering me as a member of the Technical Advisory Group of Bali Process Simulation Assessment Toolkit. I'd like to extend my thanks to Mr. Sripraha, UNHCR Senior Consultant, for her sincere efforts for preparing synthesis of the Bali Process Civil Registration Assessment Toolkit on pilot project in Pakistan, Thailand, and Vietnam, and also for delivering very nice comparative analysis on the conclusion and recommendation from 3 pilot projects. From the introductory remarks, comparative analytical statement and comments, we have been immensely benefited having a clear perception, ideas, and knowledge. And thanks to my colleague for his nice short response to the important points. As a member of the Technical Advisory Group of the Toolkit and former Registrar General Birth and Death Registration of Bangladesh, very shortly I would like to endorse most of the recommendation made by the implementing authorities of 3 piloting countries, excepting a very few. I'd like to give emphasis on a particular general recommendation, such as the Technical Advisory Group of national experts from Bangladesh, Malaysia, Pakistan, Philippines, Thailand, and UNHCR RBAP should be reassembled to confirm the very way forward. And I like to add another simple recommendation like this: as the process and activities for ensuring right to access civil registration of hard-to-reach population, or we can call it vulnerable population group, is a very critical and it is an unending issue. An expert group may be formed comprising the experts in civil registration from all other member states, particularly the countries where such vulnerable group of population exist. That's all my instant response. If I get chance, then I shall share my other views during discussion session. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Palash and Mr. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Okay, so up next, I would like to welcome the representative from Thailand, Mr. Pitasuang Janthai Chat. Special Expert on Civil Registration Management, Bureau of Registration Administration, Department of Provincial Administration, the Ministry of Interior to share the response from Thailand. Please take the floor.
ครับก็ต้องขอบคุณUNHCR นะครับที่ได้
I would like to extend my appreciation to the UNHCR and all the stakeholders for organizing this event. And I would like to thank you, Dr. C. Prabha, for providing us all the summary on the pilot projects implemented on the Bali Process Toolkit. And since for Thailand, we are the member state of Bali Process, and we have also implemented the pilot project on the civil registration in Thailand, and this has been completed. So let me provide you the background, the key target group of Thailand, especially on the hard-to-reach population. There are around 600,000 of them. And therefore, those are the target group which we will provide additional process to ensure the civil registration to them, especially students who are still in school and education. There are around 67,000 students that are pending to receive the civil registration, and there are other target group as well, or the statelessness population, and also displacement population, and several more. So on the process that we have implemented, there are a part of them has been accepted in the civil registration, and what comes next will be the welfare and the social protection from the government, as well as the provision of education, and we will do the follow-up process based on our legal mandates. And there are findings that at the office, the Bureau of Registration Administration, we have identified several issues, and we have been continuously trying to address those issues. However, let me highlight the key issues that we prioritize will be on advocates the policy level to actually help address all this civil registration issue, and we try to escalate the issue on reaching to the hard-to-reach population. So we have identified a flagship project to promote better access to hard-to-reach population, and also try to target students across the border of Thailand. And we believe that benefits from this pilot project that I would like to highlight, especially for Thailand. Well, before I say that, we need to accept that sometimes the Bali process may not be suitable for the local context, right? So therefore, this would require fine-tuning to match, the local context, because there is no silver bullet, right? So therefore, we need to fine-tune and tailor this Bali process recommendation to match the real need of Thailand, especially all the challenges in the local country. However, one of the key challenge that I would like to share with you is actually the complexity and the nature of the problem in the current scenario, especially on the security, national security, and the shifting of the landscape, and also the changing policy from the government. So therefore, it will be a challenge for us to have a concrete and clear direction from the policy level, especially on the national security. I believe in some countries, in some developed countries, sometimes they would prioritize the national security while forgetting the importance of the human rights, or maybe human rights can be deprioritized. And for Thailand, we are trying to upgrade, improve, and develop all the action plans based on the recommendations from these pilot projects in order to put them into practice and to see the success of the action plan as well. However, the roadblock could be some policy regarding the national security, that this policy may hold us back. Therefore, I believe that the improvement of the civil registration, we cannot, copy and paste the approach from one particular country and apply to our country alone. But sometimes we need to pick and choose, the practices, of some countries, and then fine-tune into our countries. I think that is also, I think UNHCR, we need to promote on the cross-sectoral and cross-country collaboration for that. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for the response from Thailand, and thank you for sharing the practical challenges in applying the toolkit to the Thailand context, and also reminding us that the toolkit might not be fit to some other contexts. And regarding the way forward itself and the action plans, so hopefully we will be able to discuss more about these in the next agenda. So thank you so much. And up next, I would like to invite the representative from Vietnam, Mr. Ngam Nhok Hien, the Deputy Director of the Department of Civil Registration, Nationality, and Authentication to share the responses. You may take the floor.
Vâng, xin chào tất cả.
Hello everyone.
Tôi xin được hỏi là ai sẽ điều khiển cái phần trình chiếu của tôi để
Can I ask who is adjusting the PowerPoint? Can I share my screen and then work on it on my own?
Yes, you can share your own screen.
Yes.
Xin mời ạ.
Quý vị đã nhìn thấy cái phần màn hình của tôi ạ?
You see this tracker yet, right?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Trước khi vào phần trình bày của mình thì
before I start my presentation, I on behalf of the Vietnamese Vietnam to thank the regional Bali Progress to accommodate Vietnam on their pilot project on the toolkit, and I have a loss on many Vietnam activity in Vietnam. It hasn't been not a long time that we have been using the toolkit, that we can recognize that is very important for to improve the quality and increase the number of the Vietnamese population to enhance their participation of local government, and then we can gain the interaction from the government to their hard to reach population according to the spirit of their progress. So in the spirit of no one is left behind. In my presentation, in my first part, I would like to provide some background information on the hard to reach and then underprivileged group in Vietnam. In the second ministry on the registration and online in Thailand from 16 to 19 November 2021. Vietnam is determined as one of the country that received the registration, the highest group, based on their overall population report from 2019. It reached 98.8%. This result is a gap for the action plan of the Vietnamese government from 2017-2024 to modernize every step of registration, especially with the software application. Let me share it with all of you. It is where we should try by the Ministry of Justice from 2015, and it is taken into practice from the beginning of 2016. It is a software that is unified, and it is applied nationally. There are around 10,000 local organizations for it, and more than 7,000 companies to support it. Even though we reach 98.9%, very high, but there is 1.2% who haven't granted the registration, and this 1.2% belong to the phrasal and population, and it's estimated that there are 15,000 people, but please remind that not many people. The number is not nearly correct because there are some related reasons. Now I am talking about the phrasal groups, and Vietnam meet some problems and difficulties as following. Number one is not enough insufficient data, not that updated, as well as not that to have a platform to keep update if anything changed. So until now, Vietnam hasn't had the data is not that updated. So because why what it happened? Because the dynamic of this group of population. One of the problems is the free movement, free migration. For example, now they stay in this location, and next day they move to another province. It's like across the country. It's not only in the border, so in other part of the country as well. So until now, Vietnam hasn't updated any platform to keep track on this group of people. The second problem is the competence, the capacity of the officers who hasn't reached the awareness on the capacity building to track and exactly who belong to this group, and they haven't had a solution to these group members. Number 3 is because the dynamics, the changing, I think that we should have the digitalized data and this data should be installed via software, so the officers, especially one from local government, can get updated from this group members. This group, I mean the phrasal groups. So they can detect and then identify. For example, this group, this population, when they was in this city, they use another name and user to track, but when they move to another place, they change it. Last but not least, Vietnam government are doing some research and assessment to have a legal framework suitable to solve the problem of registration and to identify nationality for this phrasal group. Until now, I haven't mentioned the problems of the Vietnamese side in the managing and organizing activity. Now I will talk about some activities that Vietnam has executed. Number 1, it is to introduce Bali Progress Toolkit to other division, department, to local government related about their purpose, content, and then the possibility to apply it. We have already translated from English into Vietnamese and introduced these materials to them. Secondly, after the local government report and initial report survey in 2021, we have been conducted a local survey. By the end of 2021, we started to carry out research and then build some drafts to have a survey on the assessment of CRVS to the phrasal groups, and we call it version number 1, report number 1. And this report is translated into English and reported to our regional office by the early 2022. By the thirdly, we have organized many organized conferences to ask for the experts and other related organizations about their report number 1, the first version, to discuss about the possibility to apply this toolkit nationwide in other provinces as well. Fourthly, we continue to do the survey in other provinces, in other cities. In this province, there are a lot of phrasal population. This year, we are doing on Hà Giang province, and then we continue to do it to other cities. With this survey, we continue to access the registration context in these provinces. Fifthly, for now, we have organized a seminar to upgrade their capacity and guideline some for the officers in identify and solve the problems of the registration of their phrasal group. This 5 activities, we haven't done it before, but now for 2022, we are aiming to do the activity. Number 1 is we are doing survey in 2 provinces, it's Long An and Lâm Đồng. Especially Long An, there are a lot of factories Lumdong is a new economic zone. Here, there are a lot of people from other provinces come to work. We will try to organize 2 more seminars to upgrade capacity and guideline for other places. Before we did it in Gia Lai. We will try to invite about 30 representatives from different cities, about 30, to continue to affirm their Bali progress for the local government and recommend them to continue to identify and update their information of this group. So in the end, we can map out and provide services for these people. Last but not least, we will build an toolkit Bali progress to simplify, to identify and try to report correctly and offer solution for registration for this group. I think the Bali toolkit should be simplified and adjusted for different countries within their context. It should be suitable with the context of Vietnam. After implementation of Bali toolkit, from the Vietnam, we have some recommendation to improve the toolkit better. So later on, we can adapt this version to other countries as well. Firstly, the Bali toolkit was built from 2018. So the data and some example now is a bit outdated. So we think that the data should be updated. So to guarantee the transparency, we can determine the real situation of the current situation right now. The second one, the Bali toolkit should support the assessment between the relationship between CRVS and GCM. And another agreement of GCR of the UN of their immigrant because the phrasal population belong to Bali toolkit, also belong to the group of the initiative as well. Also, we may recommend Vietnam as a significant example of registration in the region, because I think that Vietnam has been successful. The agreement between the Vietnamese government and the Laos government to solve the problem of free movement or illegal marriage between the borders of the two countries in 2015 and 2019. Until now, the Vietnam have offered their nationality for the free illegal of the people in this group. In this order, we provide their birth certificate, marriage certificate, ID, and home registration. I think in the index of the toolkit, it should be provided with some data. For example, it should be accumulated and reality to access the real outcome. More, we want to according to the Bali toolkit, we just focus on only the one who haven't haven't owned their nationality yet. I think that we should extend it. There are more. For example, some people get married and then might to another country and then move back to that country to live. Minority groups, they live in mountainous area, and it's very hard for them to access to the registration. Some people who haven't had the documented equipped, some children with special background, for example, children. For example, a child on the pin Vietnam getting in another country, and then after that they move back to Vietnam to continue their life. So they have problems. I think that the toolkit should add the addition of phrasal groups to add more people, the population group into this definition.
Như là cái nhóm hiện nay chúng ta đang xác định. Và cuối cùng là
lastly, Bali Toolkit has many technical terms
mở rộng khả năng áp dụng
technical and professional terms. So I recommend, I expect that the Bali Toolkit should be translated to other languages. Giống như là cái đề nghị của cô Sri Panna là có thể dịch các cái tài liệu này sang các cái ngôn ngữ khác để chúng tôi có thể dễ dàng hiểu. Thì sau cái năm 2022 này thì chúng tôi sẽ đánh giá được. We will try to determine
hỗ trợ cho Việt Nam áp dụng.
And we hope that we can support for our regional office to improve our pilot projects. So here recommendation and some challenges we have in Vietnam right now. Thank you very much for listening.
And thank you very much, Mr. Hien, for the response from Vietnam. Okay, good to hear the developments made by Vietnam in relation to the CRBS, and thank you for the further recommendations. So up next, I would like to invite the representative from Pakistan, Dr. Syed Mohammad Musalim, a National Technical Advisor of the Technical Support Unit on CRBS of the Ministry of Planning, Development, and Special Initiatives, Islamabad, to share the responses.
Yeah, can you? Yeah, thank you very much for my introduction. I'm Dr. Muslim, and greetings from Pakistan. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so greetings from Pakistan, a very good morning, and it is a pleasure to talking all of you, and thanks to UNHCR, RSO, and others for selecting Pakistan as one of the pilot countries, and we are very, very delighted to share our experience. I have been sharing this experience in the last webinars too, but I think this time we got a list of questions to be answered, specific questions. So I would like to curtail my presentation to responding to those specific questions. Those have been asked in the invitation letter. So the first very question that was how can then conclusion recommendation pilot projects be put into place? To our experience and to our knowledge, I think it's very critical to start with to have a political support and ownership. Just applying any activity or any project, any program in isolation would not be meaningful and would not be rewarding. You see, it's going to at the end of the day, a very collapse. So it's critical to have the ownership of all stakeholders, government departments. You see the multiple stakeholder development partners are very important, because it's not only UNHCR, one of the stakeholders, there are some other stakeholders too, national and international. So the first important would be to identify these stakeholders and get them on board and get their ownership. And I think now at a stage when we have already developed this assessment report, so probably that could be a, what I can say, a working document to discuss this, and an advocacy, you see, tool for us to go to such meetings and have ownership of the government and other stakeholders, because this is an intersectoral subject. Certainly, this not belongs to one ministry or one department. There are several departments, ministries involved in it. And also in our case, we have the national setup and then the very strong provincial governments. You see, the provincial government's ownership is also very important. And then to start with, we need to develop legal and regulatory framework and SOPs for mainstreaming, because this subject was never touched before, was never considered before. And thanks to you see the UNHCR and RSO for supporting us in this important activity. And this is the first time that we came up with the assessment study, and there were so many gaps found in this process. And the next would be the development of action plan, already been spelled out by Sri Prafa in her presentation. Is very critical. We need to develop improving awareness of both general public and targeted population. This is very critical advocacy, because we need to adopt two-pronged approach. You see, at one end, we have to you see, motivate or get ownership of the government and the political support of the government and other stakeholders. At the other end, we have to work with the community to, especially in the target areas, the target districts, which are having high problem issue. And so that the people, you see, there is a motivation at the end of the people, and they should get registered. The next question was which national action plan targets are envisaged. I think the Bali Process Toolkit is an excellent tool for us, and there is there is already a component guiding us on development of the action plan. I think if we follow strictly those guidelines, so we would be able to develop a good national action plan. There is a also need for improvement of the intersectoral collaboration among various key players. We have a technical working group already in place, and probably that could be used for this purpose at this time. And we need to have like regular interaction meetings of the technical working group, so that we develop some harmony and cohesion with the other departments and other ministries and other players. Resources availability, both for the long term, because initially this could be a pilot project in some districts, but probably we need some kind of we have to arrange some long-term resources for the implementation of the action plan. But we can still start this rolling out from the pilot districts, the districts which have already been assessed by in Pakistan. You see, pilot districts we can start, but we need to have arrange resources for the long-term regular implementation. A capacity building program designing and its rollout in the target for the government as well as the target population, already recommended also by Sri Prafa. Next, please. Next. Which of the lessons learned can be used Bali process in member state? So as this toolkit was applied in only 3 countries to start with, probably there would be some other countries, or I don't know. I read that no more piloting would be done. So which of the lessons learned so the lessons learned is, to start with, there has to be very good institutional arrangement to take care of this subject. Clear leadership, clear role and responsibilities. If the roles and responsibilities are ambiguous or not clear, probably this will not, you see, will not able to proceed further. So institutional arrangements, formulation of the technical working group with broad-based representation from multiple departments and stakeholders is very critical, because as I said, this is a intersectoral subject and it's not one ministry, one department subject. So we need to involve all stakeholders to make some breakthrough. Obtain binding ownership, all relevant players address their concerns. You see, it's so there has to be a mechanism that like the technical working group that you see they're represented, and if there are concerns by the department ministries, I think we need to find way out to address those concerns. So, and also recommended by Sri Prafa, we need to set explicit goal, objectives, milestone targets, and a monitoring framework. You see, it has to be a very comprehensive planning done for the action plan to achieve our goals. So the next question was about the Bali, how it can contribute and remove barriers to civilizations that affect marginalized, hard to reach population, how it could be more effective. It was realized by the assessment team in Pakistan and the National Technical Working Group that Bali process tool exceptionally beneficial in matching for almost all the countries having efficient national routine CRBA system. So it is very much effective and very much useful and could be used, and it is very elaborative and gives a lot of guidance on various aspects, definitions, you see the procedures and step ahead on that. But there was a need felt that some adjust. It's okay. It's a wonderful tool for those countries which are already having an adequate, good CRBA system. But there are countries, maybe in our own country, you see the CRBA system is not that well strengthened. The efforts are going on, and we are still struggling, and many milestones have been achieved for CRBA improvement. But there are gaps because we have more complex situation. We are a high population country, decentralized. It's not the all authorities with the central government, the provincial governments involved, and so many other stakeholders here. So for those countries which are having weak system, probably we have to rethink and we have to make some adjustments. So for those particular countries. So thank you very much. I just spoke on the response to the questions already asked to remain within the parameters. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Musalin, for the responses and the recommendations from Pakistan. And apologies if we are running behind our schedule. So next on our agenda, I will leave the floor to Dr. Matthias to moderate the discussion on the next steps following the implementation of the Bali Process Civil Registration Assessment Toolkit.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor again. Theoretically, we have now 7 minutes for the discussion, so it's a little bit more condensed than envisaged. I think we had a very rich panoply of presentations. We've heard a lot of parallel experiences from the countries. Let me, in light of the brevity of the time that we still have, let me just flag some issues that I think have crystallized from all these presentations. One is that we need clear and concrete direction from the policy level. And I think while we are here discussing really on a technical level, I think that Mr. Pitaswang and Dr. Musalin have both pointed out very strongly the need of government ownership, government guidance, and really governments taking the lead and committing to achieving universal civil registration. Is there anything we can do from the regional level to strengthen that high-level political buy-in? Is there anything that the country representatives in the audience would recommend us as UNHCR or the UN family as a whole to help you create that momentum for civil registration as envisaged in the ESCAP declaration and as envisaged by the Bali Process Toolkit. So with this concrete question, what can the UN family do to help you creating the political momentum? I would like to give the floor to our audience. Please raise your hands and Dr. Mosalin, please again. Dr. Mosalin, can you please take the floor?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes,
can
I
you
can.
hear me now? Okay. Should I ask Nina to put one slide that we have prepared for the next steps? Next steps. Yeah. For the next step, we have chalked out some points. I think the first would be the pilot country regional meetings. There has to be kind of a regional sharing of experiences and more elaborate, because interaction is very important than just virtual meetings, we suppose. Alignment of all stakeholder partner under a national technical working group. You see, alignment, and we need to do some kind of a more elaborate stakeholder analysis because these are, you see, areas of at the national level. A national institutional kickstart support has to be given. National provincial. So dissemination workshops and provincial and national at the national level, and maybe also a chance to do it at the regional level, where all our senior most you see officers, senior most officials are invited, and they get opportunity to listen to it away from their you see official routine, very busy, hectic work. Mapping of stakeholders analysis is very critical, important. Action plan development, as we have been doing. And then for us, I think the catalytic support for pilot district to implement the action plan in the for CRBS to start with, because I said in my presentation, there has to be two ways. One is the immediate, you see, start doing something, and one is the long-term plan where we organize some resources for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mosalin. And as I see, basically all these steps are happening on the national level. So I think you have very succinctly illustrated the point that what really matters is what happens in the field, in the country. For the stakeholder mapping, I think one interesting aspect that Dr. Shripapa also raised is the question, how can we use regional processes? What is the role of regional processes and fora in the promotion of inequality assessments? And maybe somebody from UNICEF or ASEAN would also like to share their view on how inequality assessments can be promoted within or with the help of UNICEF and with the help of ASEAN. Any voices on that, please? If not from the audience, then maybe Dr. Shripapa, would you mind to take the floor, please?
Thank you, Matthias. I would like to address this particular point that you asked, which I found very important. Maybe there are a few forums or there are a few platforms that we may look at. The first one, I think I have already shared with Matthias personally, that the issue of CRBS has been on the agenda of the ASEAN Commission for the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Women and Children. It's there, it's included in their work plan. So I think ACWC is a very good platform for both UNHCR and other UN agencies, as well as RSO, to address and try to promote further the Bali Process Toolkit. So that's the first one. The second one, which I think is also important, don't forget that this year is the 20th anniversary of Bali Process itself. And there will be a kind of, I guess, not celebration, but commemoration. And CRBS, since in 2016, the ministerial meeting has actually mentioned about importance of CRBS. So I think this year is time for ISO to actually, submit and promote further, not only the Bali Process Toolkit, but the CRBS as, as a way to addressing the root causes of trafficking and smuggling. So that's the second one. The third one, in maybe in a longer term, I think we all recall that getting everyone into the picture, a campaign for UNHCR is for 2024. And I think this is a platform where policymakers are there. And that is the best platform. If we look at policy commitment, I think that the best platform for making policymakers commit to CRBS, because they have all committed to make CRBS universal by 2024. So these are some of the platforms that we can look at. Since I have a microphone, I just want to add one thing, not really linked to the question that you brought up, Matthias, and that is about the toolkit itself. I think I heard recommendation from Vietnam and from Pakistan, our colleagues from Vietnam and Pakistan, to actually simplify the Bali Process Toolkit, because it's full of technical terms. I completely agree. But simplifying, the toolkit would not be that easy. The toolkit includes a lot of details, which actually help every country to identify the gaps. So it is quite true that when Dr. Mosalin mentioned that the toolkit is good for the countries with a good national civil registration system. But it was designed in a sense that it helped countries with some gaps in civil registration to realize themselves that there are things that they need to do, that they need to fill. So I think it's important to make this point. I completely agree with the representative from Vietnam that the toolkit needs some updates when it comes to the statistics and examples, especially now that we have 3 pilots. So examples actually could come from the pilot projects as well. So these are some of my input. Thank you, Matthias.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sripapa, for pointing out these very important aspects. And I think we all agree that there's always room for improvement and updates and modifications, and that will make the toolkit even more usable. To conclude the discussion, since we're already running a little bit over time, I think we should also emphasize that all of the reports we have heard today have basically demonstrated that civil registration is going forward. With or without a specific national action plan, countries are working on enhancing, the 3 pilot countries are working on enhancing the civil registration and try all kinds of flexible approaches, working with all kinds of partners to promote universal civil registration. As this is exactly what the ministers in the Ministerial Declaration on Civil Registration and Vital Statistics in November 21 have decided that the countries should do. And it's exactly what the recent resolution of the ESCAP Commission from May 2022 has now again reconfirmed as the vision for all ESCAP member states. I'm actually quite confident that all of you will continue the great work you're doing on making civil registration universal. I think there's still a lot of outstanding issues, gaps, For instance, for children of undocumented parents, how do they get access to civil registration? We will continue our collaboration on these issues, but at any rate, I think we are at a good point. I thank everybody for the input you have provided today, for all the additional food for thought. And with last word of thanks to all the other speakers, I hand the floor back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias, Dr. Sivappa, and Dr. Musalin for the discussion. And now we come to the end of the webinar, and I would like to invite Mr. David Scott, as Senior Australian Government official and the co-manager of the Regional Support Office of the Bali Process, to give us a closing remark.
Much, Ms. Pecky from UNHCR for moderating today, and also for being with us this morning to organise this webinar, which is of course really important. And we're really proud to have partnered with UNHCR from the Bali Process RSO on this project. It's been in the works for some time, of course through COVID, but from today we can see lots of great work has come out of this particular project. Firstly, I'll be very brief in these concluding remarks, noting the time. I'd like to thank all of the speakers today. So of course, my colleague and co-manager for the RSO, Dr. Sukmo Yuono, for his opening remarks. Of course, Matthias Roos from UNHCR for your remarks and interjections, but also your hard work on this project over the period of time that you've partnered with the RSO on it. Dr. Shri Papar, of course, thank you for joining us this morning. Great to have you with us. And the speakers from the Technical Advisory Group in our pilot countries, Mr. Sheikh Mujab Rahman, Mr. Palesh Kantibala, Mr. Fitaswang Chanchurichat, Mr. Niam Nok Hien, and Dr. Syed Musalan. Also, thank you to our RSO program managers, policy and partnerships team, Nini Ung and Lindsay for your work on this particular project. As mentioned, the RSO and the Bali Process, of course, very proud to support this project and work with UNHCR on the back of the Bali Process 2016 declaration. I think the pilot provided the opportunity for us to discuss this important topic and also learn from each other about the challenges and opportunities for civil registrations in a regional context across the three piloted countries. As I mentioned, this work couldn't have been undertaken without the support and work of UNHCR and of course the Technical Advisory Group. And I know that all of you worked very hard throughout the projects, and we're grateful for this. And of course, it's, I think, put us in a better position as a group to discuss this particular topic today. And we've seen, of course, lots of discussion around next steps and future work that could be undertaken both at a national and regional level to further support improvements to civil registrations across the membership of the Bali Process. For me, what was clear today from the webinar is a general commitment and acknowledgement of the need for more inclusive civil registration processes and practices, given their importance in addressing irregular migratory challenges for our region, but also to improve registrations, especially with respect to hard to reach places and with respect to marginalised groups. These activities, of course, go to the heart of the work of the Bali Process in countering trafficking in persons, people smuggling and related transnational crime. It's evident that with respect to the approach to civil registrations, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We've seen that there are different challenges and opportunities for each of our three pilot countries, and this is evidence of the need for a targeted and bespoke approach to continuing these activities, while still retaining the capacity for Bali Process Member States to exchange information, experiences, and provide advice on their journey with respect to civil registrations together as a group, so we can continue to learn from one another, from our experience, and to support one another as we work together through as regional neighbours and friends with respect to improving civil registrations and expanded coverage for hard to reach places. As pointed out by some of the speakers, the need for improved data and information capture is really important for any successful civil registration framework, and that's been identified here today. And we, of course, will look at that and focus on that for future dialogues and discussions. Just quickly, we recognise the feedback about the toolkit and also the need for technical and capacity building and support policy assistance. And of course, that is part of the role of the RSO and the Bali Process. And we are committed to bringing Bali Process members together to convening meetings and of course, working with UN colleagues to discuss ideas and ways forward, to learn from each other in this context, but also to look more in depth at national frameworks and national challenges, given that is really important with respect to addressing civil registration shortcomings at the national level. I'd like to continue to encourage the momentum for discussion in this topic and the enthusiastic work that's been undertaken by our technical advisory group. We are very keen to hear from Bali Process Member States about how we can take this work forward with respect to enhancements to the toolkits, translation for the self-assessments and other parts of the project, and also to have regional and national discussions together. I'd like to thank you all again for joining us today for this webinar and the discussion around civil registrations. I think it's been really excellent. And I'd like to now hand back to Ms. Pecky from UNHCR to close today's ceremony. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Scott, for the closing remark. So now the webinar has come to an end, and I would like to say thank you to our guest speakers for participating in the event and colleagues for making this webinar happen. And I would like to say thank you to everyone for joining this webinar. We appreciate you being here, and we hope to see you in the next event. And goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you, Mr. David. Thank you, Mr. Reus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.